Glad you all see here taking more punishment. I guess you only can handle one more, right? Yeah. We'll be able to do that. Today it's going to be dinosaurs, fossils in the Bible. As I told you, I'm from Creation Museum, and we do have lots of dinosaurs there, so to speak. We have, dinosaur exhibits and all that. And one of my best dinosaurs I really like to watch is from this movie. Tell me which movie this was. Which one was that? Jurassic Park. How many went to see that? You mean you went to see that atheistic movie? I don't go to see those movies. I just watch them for scientific evidence. So we're talking about dinosaurs, fossils in the Bible. Well, what are fossils in the first place? Well, fossils are living things whose parts have turned into rock, so to speak. And they do that by replacing the soft tissues or whatever in the organic thing with minerals. The minerals are rock hard a lot of times, so that's all it is. And there's two stories of how fossils got here. I believe in the Genesis flood, which means that most of all the fossils that we find in the earth were deposited during that 1-year flood of Noah. Well, evolutionists say that fossils were deposited over hundreds of millions of years through evolutionary processes. So we have two stories. As always, we should be able to test them. Let's see what they said. Well, there are billions of fossils in the world, and when they dig up a fossil, they always have this little note attached of how it got there. Do they? No, they don't. How about, does it have the little note attached, I'm 65 million years old? Now, I really love when I go into a museum and they have this rock on display, and the rock, there's a note with it, it says this rock is 337 million years old. How do they know? That's the first question. When anybody tells you that something is something old like that, ask them one thing: how do you know? Were you there? They don't. Well, let's put our thinking caps on. If there were billions and billions of fossils in the world like there are for fish, how did all those fossils get buried? Well, what happens to fish when they die? Do they sink to the bottom, get buried, and become a fossil? No, what happens to fish when they die? They float upside down on the top. Like the water version of roadkill, same thing. And what happens slowly over time? They get eaten away and they disappear. That's what happens. But what happened to all the animals who did not go on Noah's Ark? They became fish food, so to speak, and they were buried. Millions and millions, or even billions, in the case of fish, were all buried in Noah's flood because it was a complete water event. Can you imagine the entire earth be covered by water? I mean, the forces would create tidal waves that you couldn't believe. So there was a lot of destruction, and all those creatures who didn't end up in the ark ended up in the layers buried as fossils. And that's kind of where we got that geologic column that they keep bringing up. And I believe the geologic column, so to speak, was created by sedimentation organization, meaning that what were the things that were buried first? All the stuff that couldn't get away, like all the seashells and all those little creatures at the bottom of the oceans. And as you go further up the geologic column, you'll find more complex animals. I believe those are the ones who lived higher up on top of the oceans, on top of the land, and like human beings, they were the last to be buried because they were able to get away most of the time until the water overtook them. So fossilization means lots of water, but not lots of time. It does not take a long time to make a fossil. So what would a worldwide flood do? Well, it would bury billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth. And guess what? When I go from the Bible to the world, that's exactly what we see. We find massive fossil graveyards. There are graveyards of fish that contain billions of fish all in one location. They were all caught and buried at the same time and then fossilized. And we find these fossil graveyards everywhere. Here's one in Agate Springs, Nebraska. This graveyard has about 9,000 animals. And guess what we find in Nebraska? Rhinos and horses and camels and wild boars and all kinds of plants and trees and fish and seashells. What are rhinos doing in Nebraska? I thought they only had corn huskers. You know? So, you have rhinos. Well, where did they come from? I don't think they came from anywhere. I think they were there. They were buried there. You know, rhinos lived all over the world. That's what I believe. Otherwise, you know, they find them in all kinds of strange places. Como Bluffs, Wyoming, dinosaur graveyards got 483 dinosaurs all buried together. In Alaska and Siberia, they find graveyards of bears and fox and badgers and saber-toothed tigers and jaguars and lynx and mammoths and mastodons and horses and camels and all those kind of stuff up in Alaska and Siberia. What are camels doing up in Siberia and Alaska? Dinosaur National Monument, one of the largest fossil graveyards of dinosaurs in the world. Over 1,600 fossilized dinosaurs are buried up in that area. They also find them in the Gobi Desert, where there's no water at all. Gobi Desert is now 1,000 miles long, and guess what they find in the Gobi Desert? Dinosaur fossils, lots of them. And you know what? When the flood came, it came so fast that it overtook a lot of creatures. Here is a fish right in the middle of having lunch when it was caught by the floods and buried and ended up being fossilized. Here's an ichthyosaur. They're about 7 foot long, and this thing was buried and caught by the flood right in the act of giving birth. That's how fast it come. Now, I showed you earlier during the sermon time that Noah's flood sequence. You know, I believe the flood happened fast, as that shows, because what was the major source of the water of the flood? Was it the rain for 40 days and 40 nights? What was it? Yeah, it was the fountains of the great deep, which you saw exploding there. And that's where most of all the water came from, and it did not take long, I think, to cover the entire earth if those exploded everywhere. And when we look at fossilized creatures that are in the fossil record and compare them to the same creature today, like these turtles, we find fossilized turtles, and guess what? They look just like turtles are today. They haven't evolved in all those hundreds of millions of years. And we find fossilized spiders in the fossil record that just look like spiders we see today. And starfish, fossilized starfish, they're supposed to be 400 million years old. They just look like starfish we see today. There hasn't been any kind of evolution in those. And same thing for seahorses. The ones we find in the fossil record look just like the ones we see today. Now, I'm from Pennsylvania, and in Pennsylvania, the miners are always afraid of one thing, the collapse of a ceiling of a coal mine. And it does happen once in a while, and some of the source of that collapse is what we call polystrate fossils. Polystrate fossils are trees, the trunks of trees that seem to be growing right up through all the coal beds. You know, when coal doesn't come in one big layer. Coal comes in a layer maybe 50 feet deep, and then you have rock, and then maybe another layer of coal 30 feet deep, and then rock, and then another layer of coal. But these trees are growing through up every one of those layers, which is really strange. How's a tree grow up through solid rock? And another thing about them is these trees don't have any limbs or any roots. And here's a good picture of that. You can see the coal layer and then the limestone area. That's in Kettle's coal mines in Cooksville, Tennessee. And this is kind of what they look like if you would look at them from a side view. There's all these trees without no limbs, okay, and no roots growing up through the layers of rock and coal. How does that happen? You know, geologists couldn't figure this out until Mount St. Helens. And Mount St. Helens answered those questions. You know, back in 1980, Mount St. Helens exploded. And when it exploded, it ripped up a lot of trees and made a gigantic log jam. Spirit Lake, which is right north of the volcano, when after that volcano exploded, you'd see millions of trees floating on that lake. And I used to fly over that lake a lot. And I'd fly over the lake one month, and all the trees would be at the south end of the lake. And I'd fly the next month, and all the trees would be at the north end of the lake. And they'd go back and forth like this all through the year, driven by the wind. And when they're doing that, all these trees are rubbing against each other and they're rolling over, and it's stripping all the limbs and the roots and the bark off. And all that stuff is falling down into the lake. And if you look at the lake, because divers have been down there, every once in a while they'd see these logs rolling on the top. They would sit straight up and sink right down into the muck. And those layers of rock and peat are growing up right around those trees, just like we saw. In fact, there they are, some of them right now. And you know what that looks like? Just like the mines in Pennsylvania. In fact, this is a Yellowstone petrified forest. And now it explains why those tree trunks don't have any leaves or any roots growing up through the rock. Mount St. Helens showed that catastrophism really exists in nature. And now they believe that this is how a lot of Yellowstone petrified forests got there, and how the coal beds with trees growing up through them. It didn't evolve over hundreds of millions of years. It didn't work for those fossils. This is a miner's hat that's now rock hard. It was found in a mine in Tasmania, Australia. It had been covered with water for more than 50 years. It's one of those soft felt hats. And they left it down in the mine. It was covered with water for 50 years, and they drained the water out, went back down there. They found this hat with solid rock. Now, it only took 50 years for it. It probably happened sooner. They just got there in 50 years. It doesn't take long to make a fossil, folks. There have been people that have buried their cat or dog and dug it up 5 years later, and it was completely fossilized. Farmers have complained that the fence posts in the ground have been solid rock. They've been fossilized. All it takes is the minor amount of water and the right amount of minerals, and things have become fossilized in a very short period of time. It doesn't take millions of years, like they taught me when I was going through school. And not only fossils, but there's a lot of things in the world that doesn't take long to make. You know, we can make crude oil in one day in a laboratory. We say, why don't we do that instead of buying it from the Mideast? Because it costs a lot more to do it. Okay, but we can make it in a day. We can make coal in a laboratory in a week. Doesn't take millions of years. And we can make petrified wood, fossilized wood, in 1 week. There's even a patent to do it. Doesn't take long. Here's a fossilized teddy bear. Now I know that that's not millions of years old, for sure. And not only fossils, but gemstones. When you go to the store now, what's the first question you need to ask the jewelry department when you want to buy a piece of jewelry? Is it real or man-made? Because we can make all kind of jewelry now. In fact, this scientist, Dr. Len Cram, creates synthetic opals in his backyard in 2 weeks. And you know what? He's a committed Christian, but he's actually able to grow opals in glass jars stored in his shed in the laboratory, and only takes a couple weeks. There's one of his jars. It's slowly, turning into opals. So laboratory-made gems like sapphires and rubies and cubic zirconium and emeralds and those type of things. My wife says, if you go buy me jewelry, which she loves, guys take hints, she says, don't buy me the fake stuff. All right? You got to buy the real stuff. So see, they used to tell me when I was going to high school, it took millions of years to make diamonds and opals and emeralds and those type of things. No, it don't. I could do it in the laboratory in a few weeks. How long have they been making man-made diamonds? Long time. Well, what about that ark stuff? I told you there was a Noah's flood, and he built an ark to take all the land-breathing animals and the 8 people to protect them from the flood and start a new life. Well, was the ark big enough? And how did Noah get all the animals on the ark? Did he have to go chasing them around and all that type? But how would you get the T-Rex on there and all those gigantic dinosaurs and all those big creatures like, whales and elephants and all that? Well, I go to some churches and I have found this drawing on the walls of their kindergarten Sunday schools. Now, you know what? That looks pretty cute, but it's dangerous. because the ark did not look like that, folks. And all these arks are all small little comic boats with all the animals hanging out and the giraffes poking up through the top. I don't even see any dinosaurs on it. Well, you know, one of the questions the world asks, hey, Christian, how did Noah get all the animals on the ark? And they say, hey, no way that was going to happen. Well, you know, they forget one thing, because they like to talk a lot, but when you try to nail them down, they can't come up with answers, because, you know, the ark wasn't like that little boat that you see on the kindergarten walls. It was big enough to hold 522 railroad cars. Okay, that baby was, God said 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits, which would give, if you use a cubit as 18 inches, which is approximately what we think it is, it might have been a little bit more, that makes the ark at least 437 feet long, 73 feet wide, and 44 feet tall. Is that a big boat? Absolutely. And a lot of computer scientists I know did calculation on what was the best kind of shape that would survive a flooded, completely flooded planet, where there would be tidal waves and high waves and all that. And that's the kind of shape that we've come up with. In fact, the new ark is going to be that shape right there that you see. It's going to be actually 510 foot long. We're using a little bit bigger than 18 inches for a cubit, 51 foot tall and 85 feet wide. That's a big boat, folks. In fact, if you look down there in the lower left corner, there's one of those big Apatosaurus type dinosaurs, and you see a man standing in front of them. That's how big that baby was. That gives you the size of what we believe the ark was using those dimensions. And you know what? The ark did not have to navigate to go someplace. All it had to do was what? Float. That's it. And that's the design that we found that would work and upright and stay upright in violent storms and huge waves that we would find in a fully covered earth flood. Well, the ark was big, but was it big enough? Could we get all those big animals like giraffes and elephants and hippopotamuses and all that, not to mention even the dinosaurs? So this is a giant sloth. And let me show you something. That's how big those creatures were. Look at the man right there. Okay? Those are big creatures. How did they get all that on there? In fact, my friend Dr. Gary Parker is showing a claw from a giant sloth. So, it's for the same reason I told you about getting all those dogs. You know, what did dogs produce? Only dogs. So what did God tell Noah to do? Get how many of each kind? 2. Now he gets 7 of some kinds. Why? They use them as what? Sacrifice, that type of thing, the clean ones. But in order to preserve a species, so to speak, a kind rather, they only need 2, male and female. And we believe there was about 50 kinds of dinosaurs. All right? So there's 50 of those babies. You say, well, how do you get those things on the ark? Well, let's put our thinking caps on. If you were Noah, how would you get all those big dinosaurs on the ark? What would you do? Would you get eggs? Yeah, it would fit, but what would be the problem with eggs? First of all, you need the parents, right? So it doesn't help. You know, bringing eggs is not going to help. So what would you bring, say, for a T-Rex? Yeah, you bring the babies, the juveniles, the ones that can live without their parents. Why? First of all, you wouldn't need a big T-Rex dinosaur, male or female. You would just need a small male or female, okay, juvenile. That's all you would need. And 2, it wouldn't be big, so it would chase you around the ark for a year. You wouldn't want that to happen either. So I'd bring juveniles, and that's probably what God brought. And you know what? We figured it out. If the average size of a dinosaur between the big ones and the real little ones is the size of a sheep, heck, you could get all those dinosaurs and all those creatures on the ark and only fill up about 1/3 of the ark with all the kinds that we know that was in existence. That's all. You'd have 2/3 of the ark to have tennis courts and football fields, you know, and that kind of stuff. Anybody know what this is? It's coprolite. What's coprolite? Fossilized what? Dung. Even dung is fossilized. We find lots of that stuff. If you're ever interested, there's a book called Noah's Ark, a feasibility study, which is very interesting because it goes through all the problems that Noah would have to solve to have an ark. And it's very interesting. Well, in that ark, he did have dinosaurs because we know they existed after the flood, but I think they've all died out since then, most of them. And you see a T-Rex tooth there. So how do we fit dinosaurs into the Bible? I get asked that question. How do you fit dinosaurs in the Bible? You know my answer is, you don't. I don't fit dinosaurs in the Bible because that's like fitting all that evolutionary stuff into the Bible. What I do is I use the Bible to explain dinosaurs. And guess what? The Bible does talk about dinosaurs. Just like it talks about biology and geology, anthropology and astronomy. Well, let's put on our biblical reality glasses, and we know that on day 6, all the land dinosaurs were created by God. And we knew that man fell. All right, so we know that happened. And then the flood came. So when man fell and God cursed Adam and the universe, I believe at that time the animals started to eat each other, and that, not only that, but they began to die out just like man did. And when the flood happened about 1656 years after the creation of Adam, then all those animals who breathed air, which is the only ones that Noah had to bring on the ark, all those who were outside the ark died and were buried and fossilized. Did Noah have to get the sharks on the ark? No, because they what? They can live in the oceans. How about the whales? They breathe air, but they can live in the oceans, can't they? So God didn't have to put any of those on the ark. But I believe that most of them died in the oceans because you can imagine what was going on in the oceans, all that silt and chemicals and all that stuff from burying the whole entire earth probably polluted the water pretty bad. And I would say that a lot of fish and whales and sharks and all those creatures died, but there was at least 2 of every kind, male and female, that survived, just like the ark. And after the flood, they got off the ark, they faded away because the world, was it the same world after the flood as it was before? No, they slowly died out because it wasn't the same kind of world with all those lush food and everything and the beautiful temperatures. And guess what? They didn't find dinosaur bones in good quantity until about the mid-1800s. So why do we not find the word dinosaur in the Bible? Well, the word dinosaur was coined in 1841 because that's when they started finding all the dinosaur bones. But in the Bible, the Hebrew word for dragon is tanyan. And that's what the Bible uses a lot of times for dinosaurs. It uses the word tanyan. So, the King James was translated into 1651 during that year. The word dinosaur wasn't invented until 1841. That's the reason why you don't see the word dinosaur in the scriptures. But the word dragon is located 27 times in all those Bible references. It talks a lot about dragons. So, the biblical model. God made the beast of the earth after its kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the earth after its kind, and God saw it was really good. And it was evening and morning was the 6th day. Well, what did T-Rex, when he was created on that 6th day, what was on the menu? Elephants, other dinosaurs, giraffes, horses, and all that? No. What was he supposed to eat? Plants, fruits, and vegetables. But you say, but T-Rex had teeth up to 6 inches long. I showed you a picture of those. Yeah, he did. So, how did the Bible, though, describe T-Rex when he first was created? God told him to eat plants, or eat meat, or be a scavenger, or eat plants and meat. What did God tell him to do? Eat plants, vegetables, and all that. So what did T-Rex have on the menu? If we look at it through our biblical reality glasses, it says right there in Genesis 1:30, I have given every green herb for food, and it was so. So T-Rex had watermelons and cantaloupes and apples and all those good things. But people say, yeah, but T-Rex had big teeth. Well, just because you have big teeth, does that mean you eat meat? Isn't that making an assumption? I know lots of things that have big teeth that only eat plants. This guy is a black Yukari from North and South America. Look at the teeth that guy has. He totally needs some kind of bridge work and all that kind of stuff in there, dentures or whatever, because he has big teeth but only eats plants. This guy is a silver langor money. He's got big teeth too. What does he eat? Plants. He only eats leaves, in fact. But look at this guy. Look at the jaw and the teeth on this creature. This guy must really be a big meat eater. You know what that is? That's a fruit bat. What do fruit bats eat? Fruit. That's why they're called fruit bats. He's got big teeth, but he only eats fruit. And this gray-headed fox, flying fox, lives in Australia. That's all he eats too. There was this lion named Little Tyke. And this lion, there's his owner. The only thing that she would eat was plants and fruit and vegetables. She would not eat meat. And anytime people offered her meat, she would not eat it. You know, I've had cats at home, and those cats, they can live all day on eating, you know, other things other than meat, though they like meat, and they'll eat that only if they can. But cats and dogs and other creatures, they can survive. My dogs just love pineapple and pumpkin, you know, and they love all kind of fruits. They love peanut butter and all that. They don't have to eat meat. They like meat, but they can live without meat. And they got pretty big teeth, I know. So just because you have big teeth does not mean that you have to eat meat. So T-Rex was a land animal, right? And all land animals were created on day 6. Who else was created on day 6? Man. So the question is, did T-Rex live with man? Absolutely. Now they might not have lived in the same house. And we alligators live in the same time we do, but we don't live with them, do we? But you could have. Adam could have had a pet T-Rex. That would have been really neat. You could take it to school, nobody would ever bother you, right? So it worked pretty good. And they lived on day 6. They were created on day 6 with man. So all those dinosaurs, those land dinosaurs, lived with man. The dinosaurs and trilobites and all those lived at the same time. So, did dinosaurs live when Noah lived? Absolutely. You put them on the ark. So, who saw live dinosaurs in history? Well, that's a good idea. You know, there's many legends of dinosaur-like creatures called dragons. What's the main animal on Chinese menus usually? Or on their menus as pictures and stuff? Dragons. You know, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I believe there were such things, I could see it, of animals that breathe fire, and I'll show you why. So here's a digital photograph, by the way, of Adam and Eve and one of their pet dinosaurs, if you wanted to know. But you know, there are pictures of dinosaurs by men. You know, on the walls of some of the Indian tribes, especially down in southwestern United States, the Indians always drew pictures of animals that they saw during their lifetimes. And they drew them on their cave walls, like bison and horses and deer and antelope. But you know what also we find as pictures on their cave walls? Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs and people. Here's a picture outlined of a monosaurus type dinosaur. Here's it right here. See where this thing is. There it is. It's a petrograph. Petroglyphs are cave drawings. Pictures on cave walls. This one is in Hawaii Supai Canyon, Arizona. And there's a picture of a dinosaur that we know lived from the fossils that we find, and that's a scientist rendering of what we believe it looked like we do other dinosaurs, like they did in Jurassic Park, same thing. And this is the actual picture on the cave wall. Now I have a question. How did they know how to design on their cave wall a picture of a full-fleshed dinosaur? These Indians who lived 1,000 years ago before they even found the bones of dinosaurs. How were they able to draw their picture? They had to what? They had to see them. We find them on their cave walls, full-sized pictures of dinosaurs, so they had to see them. Here's a couple other ones. This is a sauropod type dinosaur that's found on a cave wall. This one is in White River Canyon, Utah, and you can see, barely see the outline there, but there it is right there. See, I don't see what that thing is sticking out of the top of the dinosaur. It could have been some kind of saddle or something. I don't know. But that's what's pictured on their cave walls. So, how do they draw a picture of a full-size dinosaur like that? They had to see them. And there's kind of a picture of what I think they were drawing, some kind of creature like that, one of those Apatosaurus-type creatures. So scientific evidence supports the Bible that dinosaurs and people lived at the same time, because God said He created all the land animals, including the dinosaurs and all the large beasts of the earth, on day 6, and that's what God says about man. He was created on day 6, so they had to live together, so they had to see Him. And when the flood came, those creatures got on the ark, they survived, they got off the ark, and they lived for a while, but they slowly died out, and they still live with man. You know, that's why I believe in those knights in the shining armor, fighting the dragons. And I'll show you here. This is the T-Rex. And this T-Rex, one of these T-Rexes were found in Montana in about the mid-90s. And I showed you that when they took that T-Rex back to the laboratory, they found in its leg bones, which are not completely fossilized, they found soft tissue and red blood cells, and they also found veins and that type of stuff. And a T-Rex is supposed to be 65 million years old. And there's a picture of the elastic tissue and fresh tissue and soft fibrous tissue that they found, and there's a picture of the veins and the red blood cells. Now they found this T-Rex is supposed to be 65 million years old. Yet they're finding soft tissue that was so pliable that when they spread it apart, it snapped back. And they found and proved that what those cells they found were red blood cells. You think red blood cells will hang around for 65 million years? There's no way. You say, well, what does science say about it? Well, they have their comeback. Maybe there's something in the earth that regenerates the red blood cells over hundreds of millions of years. Now, I can't prove that, neither can they, but that's their comeback. So that's why I don't use evidence to witness to people, because they can say stuff like that. And we have one of our scientists there at AIG brought back 200 pounds of fresh dinosaur bones from the North Slope of Alaska. They were actually dinosaur bones frozen, and they also had the ligaments and everything on those bones. How could that happen if they're supposed to be 65 million years old? I told you about Dr. Gary Parker. He's a paleontologist, and he lives down in Florida, and he goes along the banks of the rivers and finds all kinds of fossilized clamshells. But you know what also he's found in that same area where the fossilized clamshells are and buried at those depths? He found clamshells that still have the meat on them. Okay? And they're supposed to be 2.2 to 5 million years old. But yes, he finds the clamshells buried the same layer as the fossilized one, and they still have the meat on them. So, it's not as simple as evolutionists say it is. You know, I told you the Bible talks about dinosaurs, and here's one example. In Job 40, verses 15 to 24, God talks about the behemoth. And I believe behemoth was one of those Apatosaurus-type dinosaurs, which I'll show you here in a bit. And in Job 40:15, God says something interesting about the behemoth. He says, Job, look. He's telling Job to look at this creature. If you read that, he says, behold. What's the word behold mean? Look, Job, behemoth, which I made with you. Now that's a very interesting comment by God. God says He made that land dinosaur when He made man. He eats grass like an ox. He moves his tail like a cedar. His strength is in his hips. His power is in his stomach. His bones are strong as pieces of brass. He is the chief of the ways of God, which is a Hebrew saying this is the largest creature I've ever made on earth, Job. Take a look. Now, are the commentary notes in the Bible inspired? No, just God's Word is inspired. Now, a lot of people in a lot of Bibles have put comments in it that he was talking about some other creature like an elephant or something like that. But he says something here. He moves his tail like a cedar tree. Well, what's a cedar tree? It's one of those big trees, isn't it? And I think he was talking about the Lebanon cedars because that's what grew in that area. Those trees, you know, are like 50 foot in diameter and 100 feet high. Those are big monster trees. And God says he moves his tail like a cedar. So we're talking about some humongous tail that's big. Well, there's a hippopotamus has a big belly, doesn't it? Yeah. So do elephants. What about the tail in the elephant? Is that as big like a cedar tree? I don't think so. How about a hippopotamus? Look at that little dinky thing. So what I did is I took what I thought should look like a tail that swung like a cedar tree, and I stuck a hippopotamus on it. Does that look right? Nah. How about an elephant? Nope. Well, those two don't work, so what works? I stick one of those dinosaur-type creatures on and it fits perfectly. And I believe that's the kind of creature that God was telling Job to look at. Behold, Job, behemoth, one of those sauropods, apatosaurus-type creatures. And I believe that's what God was telling and showing Job to look at. So, which one looks like a cedar tree? The elephant, okay, or the behemoth? And I believe behemoth, that picture there, works perfectly. Now, when I went to go see this movie, only for scientific reasons, my wife was an unbeliever at the time, but the Lord was working on her, and I was witnessing to her. And we went to see this movie, and when she saw this sequence, she says, "You're right, Brian, he does swing his tail like a cedar tree." What movie is that? Jurassic Park.
Species of their form from the Cretaceous period.
That's a technical term by paleontologists. That's when my wife said he does sway his tail like a cedar tree. And I believe that's what God was telling Job to look at. But there in Job 41, God talks about the Leviathan. Now a lot of people, I believe too, there was some kind of dinosaur that may have been part water dinosaur, part land dinosaur, but it was pretty big. Because God says a lot of things about Leviathan. Leviathan in Isaiah 27:1 is compared to Satan, the dragon, and a whole bunch of other places like the Psalms and Leviathan in Psalm 104. Because Leviathan in the sea with the ships. And God says something very interesting about Leviathan. He's basically saying, hey Job, do you think you can control Leviathan like I can? He says, Leviathan sneezes, flash forth light, and out of his mouth go burning torches, and out of his nostrils smoke goes forth, and his breath kindles coals, and a flame goes forth from his mouth. Now God is describing some kind of dinosaur that could blow fire. He says he can kindle coal, and a flame goes forward from his mouth. And I believe what the Lord's saying. Straightforward. You know, could a dinosaur breathe fire? Well, this bombardier beetle, which is only a ½ an inch long, all right, it's a very interesting beetle. What it does, it has a chemical storage unit in its back end. And these are all different looks of that bombardier beetle. And there you see a bombardier beetle, and in the back he has two storage chambers, just like a rocket. He has hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone, and in there, they're inert, but when he mixes them together, they explode at a temperature of 212 degrees, and he blows it out his butt right at his enemies. It's a pretty interesting defense mechanism, does it? And any kind of frog that sees they're going to have this guy for lunch gets a real surprise. Well, how do you think that this creature evolved? That over 100 million years he mixed chemicals together until he got the right combination? In the meantime, blew himself to smithereens, trying to figure that out. See, evolution can't explain these kind of creatures, but I believe that if a creature a half an inch long could do that, I believe a dinosaur that was 30 foot tall and weighed 20 tons could breathe fire of some sort. And I told you those stories of the knights in shining armor fighting the dragons. I said, where there's smoke, there's fire, folks. And then I had one fireman come up to me at one of these talks. He says, I got a little bit of explanation about the knights in shining armor. And I said, what's that? He says, we wear all those shiny suits when we go into a fire because they reflect the heat. And he blazed, maybe that's why the knights wore that shining armor, to do the same thing. So I thought that was interesting. So what happened to the dinosaurs? What happened to them? You know what I believe happened to them? They died. But not 65 million years ago. There's all kinds of stories about when the dinosaurs died. And some of those stories are like a meteor hit the earth and it blew up so much dirt in the atmosphere that it covered the entire earth, and the sun couldn't get through, and all the plants died, so all the creatures that ate the plants died, and all the creatures that ate the plants, eaters that ate the plants died, and that's why they died out. They all starved, all right? But maybe they ate too much. I mean, that can happen too. Maybe they were hunted. Okay, you ever have Kentucky Fried Dinosaur? It's very possible. Men hunted. Men like to hunt big game. And when those dinosaurs came off the ark, after a while they become good targets for hunters. So I believe that's what happened to them too. Or maybe the alien creatures of the Transformers brought them. What do they call those guys? Decepticons or whatever they were? But I think my favorite theory why I believe the dinosaurs died is they smoked themselves to death. Hey, my theory is just as good as theirs if you're not using the Bible. But if we put on Bible reality glasses, sin came into the world through Adam, and the wages of sin are death, aren't they? That's what the Bible teaches. So what happened to the dinosaurs? Well, I believe because of God's judgment on the earth for sin during the flood, that most of them all died in the flood because they weren't on the ark, and they were buried and became fossils. And one day, they did get off the ark, but that world was not the same beautiful paradise it was before, and I believe they died out after a time, and that man hunted them too for trophies, just like they do any big wild game. So the Bible teaches that the true story of the dinosaurs and what happened to them. But you say, well, why should we worry about dinosaurs? Why should we study them? Why should we be interested in dinosaurs? Well, number one, I think they're pretty neat. And I know that kids love dinosaurs, don't they? They really do. So I call dinosaurs missionary reptiles or missionary lizards because Christ tells us a few things. He tells us he was the creator, the sustainer, our judge, and our redeemer. And through the Bible it tells us about the creation and the fall of man, the corruption, the catastrophe, the flood, and Christ returning one day to take us all back with him. And dinosaurs show a number of things. They show God's perfect creation and design. And their death and disease show how man's corrupt sin brought corruption to the world and death. And that their fossil graveyards show evidence that God judges the world. And the flood is a judgment of God. But you know why we should know about dinosaurs and study them and use them? Because we as Christians are not the only fishers of men, are we? The evolutions are out there fishing for men, especially kids in their young age, the same way. They're fishers for men too. And they use dinosaurs as the lure to draw kids into evolution. And you see that all the time on the Discovery Channel and all those other kind of similar channels. But if we look at the world through our biblical glasses, we find that the Bible has not changed in all those thousands of years, that it reconnects the Bible to our real world today just like it did thousands of years ago. So when we study dinosaurs, hey folks, there's no mystery about them. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and we understand where the dinosaurs came from and what happened to them and where they disappeared. Now, a lot of these things I've talked about are in those answers books. It talks about dinosaurs. It talks about starlight. You know, how could the universe be billions of light years big, and we still see the stars? Now, that means the only way, if those stars are 15 billion light years away, so to speak, then it took 15 billion years to get here. And that's how they explain it. But the Bible has other reasons that why I believe that Adam was able to see the stars when he was created. The stars were only made 2 days before him. The Lie of Evolution by Ken Ham talks about what I talked about, the church, and why the church is failing. And he asks him why, shows you how to be able to go out there and witness to people in a very easy way. Also, there's an answer book for kids. I think all those dragon books are gone. But also, I told you, get that Answers magazine. If you get the magazine, $24 a year, you get a DVD for every year that you buy a subscription to, and you can take a DVD with you on the table for every year that you buy. And I told you one of the main reasons to buy it is because my article's in that one. And I told you about this information thing. Believe me, reading about information and how I believe it's a thing that can kill evolutionary theory, you'll see very easy how to explain to people why that's true. Because information in its non-material physical nature, you just can't have information arise on its own by itself out of nothing. And by the way, I forgot to tell you before that all those books are 10% off. So please get them for you and yourself and for Christmas gifts, because I don't want to take them back with me. I don't need to do that. I don't want to pay UPS. So get those and get an issue for the magazine. You know, for $24 a year and a free DVD, it's a real good deal. Get them for your friends and for your family for Christmas. They're really going to like it because it talks about all this stuff that I've talked about and does a good job of explaining that stuff in full detail. If you look at the book, it's really, the magazine, it's really put together well. So it's not some cheap thing that, you know, you pay for a few bucks for. So I hope I was able to give you lots of information during this conference. I thank Pastor for he made me come, you know, since he wanted to see this again. So I think it was a good idea because it gives a chance to give you all that information again, because over time we forget that stuff. Even I forget that stuff, and I talk about it all the time. So thank you for allowing me to come, and thanks for being here, and maybe hope to see you all again. Thank you, folks. See, this guy knows about Cousin Guido.
Okay, well, in closing, we are going to sing one more hymn, and we're all going to stand to do this.